What would you do if your own mother told you to hand everything you own to your stepsister for the good of the family? How far is it okay to go when the house you grew up in is legally yours, but everyone treats you like a guest? This is how I went from being the quiet, boring son they walked over to the man who was waiting for them with a lawyer when they came home to an empty house. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Alex, and for most of my life, I thought that keeping the peace was my job. I am 29, a software engineer, a quiet, normal, nothing special to look at. I live in the same house where I grew up, the house my father bought long before I was born. He passed away a few years ago, and that house is the only place that still feels like him. It smells like old books and coffee if you close your eyes in the hallway. It has creaking spots on the stairs where he used to joke that the house was saying hello. Now it also has my mother, her new husband, and my stepsister. They think of the house very differently. For them, it is not a memory or a promise. For them, it is a stage and a storage unit and a background for pictures. To them, I am just the quiet guy who happens to sleep in one of the bigger rooms and park in one of the better spots in the driveway. On the day that everything finally started to shift, I came home late from work. It was already turning dark outside, and the sky was that tired gray color that makes everything feel heavier. I had my backpack over one shoulder and a bag of groceries in my hand. I remember the weight because the plastic handle was cutting into my fingers as I tried to unlock the front door. I opened the door and heard laughing right away. It was loud, a sharp kind of laughing, the kind people do when they are not worried about who is listening. I recognized my stepsister Bella's voice first. She has this high, excited tone when she is with her friends, like everything is a performance. I heard another girl and then a guy's voice. They were all in the living room. I slipped my shoes off and walked in, trying to make myself small out of habit. The living room used to feel big when it was just my parents and me. Now it felt crowded, even when only a few people were in it. My father's old armchair was still in the corner, the one with the worn leather arms where he used to sit and read. Today, Bella's friend was sitting in it, legs stretched out, shoes on the armrest, scrolling on her phone. Bella was on the couch, my couch, the one I bought after college when I started earning my own money. She had her feet up on the coffee table, and she was talking into her phone camera, telling some story for her followers. On the TV, my game console menu was open. The guy on the other end of the room had one of my controllers in his hand. Bella looked up at me and smirked. She told her phone audience in a joking voice that the homeowner had arrived. Then she turned the camera away and told me that they were just using my setup for a bit and that I should relax. She said that my stuff was basically community property now. Her friend laughed and nodded. I set the grocery bag down in the kitchen and tried to breathe. This could have been a small thing. I knew that. I could have asked them to move, or I could have joined them, or I could have gone straight to my room and ignored it. I had done all three of those things at different times before. None of it mattered much to them. My mother, Maria, came into the kitchen while I was unpacking the groceries. She was dressed nicely, hair done, makeup carefully in place, like she was always ready to be seen. She did not say thank you for the food. Instead, she asked why I had bought the cheap pasta instead of the fancy kind she liked. Then, without waiting for an answer, she said that we needed to talk. She told me that she and her husband, Peter, had discussed things. She said that the house had to be used in a smarter way. She said that Bella needed more space if she was going to grow her online presence and that my big room was the logical choice. Then she added that my car was just sitting there most of the day while I worked from home and that it would be more useful for Bella, who needed to drive to campus and to shoots. I remember staring at the kitchen counter. There was a small crack in the tile near the sink, and my eyes kept drifting there because it was easier than looking at her. I told her, as calmly as I could, that the car was in my name, and so was the lease for the parking spot, and that my room was my room. I said that I was not going to give them up. My mother sighed in that way that made it sound like she had been dealing with me for years and was finally at her limit. She said that I was being selfish and childish. She said that a real man would not cling to a room and a car when his family needed them. She told me that I needed to think about Bella's future and that my father would have wanted me to help her. The thing about that last part is that she used it often. Whenever she wanted something from me, she would say that my father would have wanted it. She knew it hurt. She used it anyway. I told her that my father had wanted me to be careful and that he had told me not to let anyone push me around when it came to the house. I did not say it to be cruel, I just said it because it was true. She froze for a second at that, and then her face changed. Her eyes went cold, even if her voice stayed soft. She said that if I cared more about bricks and furniture than about family, maybe I should leave. She said that if I was so attached to my belongings, I could take them and go find my own place. She said that then Bella could actually use the house for something useful. Her words hit me harder than I expected. She did not shout. That might have been easier to handle. She just said it like it was a reasonable suggestion, like she was offering me a choice that made sense. I carried the groceries to the pantry in silence. In the living room, I heard Bella call out to my mother and ask if she could show her a video. My mother went back in there, and the laughter started again. I stayed in the kitchen until I felt my hands stop shaking. A little later, my mother called me into the living room. Bella was there with her friends and with Peter. Peter sat in the corner armchair where my father used to sit, hands folded over his stomach. He gave me a tired smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. Bella was sitting with her leg over the arm of the couch, looking completely at home. My mother explained to everyone that she had talked to me about a fair new arrangement for the house. She said that Bella needed a larger room and that my car was the best choice for Bella's needs. She told them that I was resisting this and that she did not understand why I was making it so difficult. Bella's friend giggled and said that I was being dramatic. Bella announced to the room in a joking voice that I was acting like some kind of dragon guarding a pile of old junk. She waved her hand around at the bookshelf full of my father's books, at the tools stacked neatly in the corner, at the console under the TV. Peter cleared his throat and said that maybe I should be more flexible. He told me that I was young and that I could always rent a little place nearby. He said that the house was really my mother's, in spirit if not on paper, and that it was time for her to enjoy it. The strange thing was that they all talked about me as if I was not standing right there. They described what should happen to my space and my belongings like it was a game of furniture Tetris. They treated my room like an empty square on a floor plan that they could just assign. I told them slowly that I understood they wanted more space, but that I was not going to give away my room and my car. I said that the car was mine legally, that I had paid for it with my own money, and that the house was not a toy for everyone to rearrange all the time. I said that I would not sign anything, and I would not move out just to make room for Bella's walk-in closet. The room went quiet for a moment. Bella's friend shifted on the armchair, looking uncomfortable. Then Bella laughed and told everyone that this was exactly what she had said, that I was obsessed with my things. She called me boring, said that I worked all day and then sat in my room all night, and that it was a waste of a good space. My mother put a hand on her hip and told me that if I was going to be stubborn, then maybe I should start looking for another place to stay. She said that she did not want tension in her home. She said that if I could not act like part of the family, then she could not promise I would always be welcome there. Peter nodded in agreement. He said that it was not healthy for a grown man to stay in his childhood room forever, and that maybe this was the push I needed. Bella added that once I moved out, she could finally turn the house into something modern and stylish. They were all so sure of themselves. They were sure that I would fold like I always did, that I would apologize, promise to be more generous, maybe offer a compromise. They expected me to give them part of what was mine just to keep things smooth. That had been the pattern for years. But standing there, listening to them talk about me and around me, something inside me went very still. It was not anger, not the loud kind at least. It felt more like a door closing. I realized that they did not see me as a person with rights or with a history in that house. They saw me as an obstacle between them and the life they believed they deserved. I did not argue. I did not shout or try to explain myself again. I just said that I had heard what they wanted and that I would think about what to do. My mother rolled her eyes and said that I should not take too long because Bella already had plans for my room. After a while, Bella and her friends went back to the game. My mother and Peter moved into the kitchen. I slipped out of the living room and went down the hallway to my room. The air there felt different, heavier but also clearer. I closed the door behind me and looked around. The walls were lined with shelves, books, and a few old photos of my father and me at different ages. My desk was against the window, my computer humming softly. In the corner, there was a tall wardrobe I barely used. On top of it, half hidden under a folded blanket, something caught my eye. There was a small, dusty metal box sitting on the wardrobe. I had seen it before, but never really noticed it. This time I dragged a chair over, climbed up, and pulled it down. Dust coated the lid. I wiped it away with my sleeve. On the top, in my father's careful handwriting, there was a label. It had my name on it, and under my name were two simple words that made my chest tighten: House and Trust. I carried the metal box to my bed and sat down with it in my lap. It was heavier than it looked. My hands left faint, clean streaks on the lid where I had wiped the dust away. For a moment, I just held it and listened to the noise in the house fade into the background. Bella's laughter was still coming from the living room, but it sounded far away. The box had a simple little lock on the front. The key was already in it, tied with a piece of old string. That detail made my throat tighten. My father must have done that on purpose. I turned the key, heard the soft click, and lifted the lid. Inside, everything was neatly arranged. There were folders, envelopes, and a small notebook with a blue cover. On top was a folded letter with my name written on it in my father's careful handwriting. My name looked strange now, like it belonged to someone younger, someone who did not yet understand how heavy family can feel. I opened the letter and started to read. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but the ink was still dark. My father wrote that if I was reading his words, it meant time had passed and I was dealing with things on my own. He reminded me that he had tried to explain everything in person, but he knew grief was a fog, and he did not trust a foggy mind with important details. So he had written them down. He told me that the house was not just 4 walls and a roof. For him, it had been safety after a hard childhood, a promise he had made to himself that his own kid would never go through the same kind of insecurity. He said he had arranged things so that I would not be at the mercy of anyone's moods or opinions when it came to where I lived. He wrote that my mother had her own ways of seeing the world, and that she loved comfort and attention. He said that was not a crime, but that it could become a problem if she forgot where things came from. He warned me that people sometimes grew used to money or stability that they did not earn, and they started to believe it was theirs by right. He repeated a line he had said to me many times when I was younger. He said that promises become real only when they are written down, signed, and kept somewhere safe. He mentioned a lawyer, Mr. Harris, who had helped him with the will and with something he called a living trust. He wrote that Mr. Harris had been told clearly that his first duty was to protect my position in any argument about the house. He ended the letter by asking me to be kind, but not weak. He told me that I had a right to live in the house without being threatened or pushed aside. He said if anyone ever tried to force me to sign papers I did not understand, I should not do it. Instead, he wanted me to call Mr. Harris and ask questions. I put the letter down very slowly. My hands were shaking again, but not in the same way as earlier. It felt like a line from the past had reached out and wrapped around my chest, anchoring me. For years, I had told myself that my mother had suffered so much after my father died that I should not cause waves. I had told myself that giving up little things was the right thing to do. Now I realized that the little things had become big things while I was not paying attention. Under the letter, there were copies of documents. I did not understand all the legal terms, but I saw my father's name and my own more than once. I saw the name of the house, the full address written in block letters. I saw the words will and trust and beneficiary on different pages. I saw my mother's name, too, in a different section. I closed the folder before my stomach could twist more. I leaned back on the bed and let my head rest against the wall. My mind drifted to the hospital room where my father had spent his last weeks. The air there had smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. I remembered sitting by his bed with my laptop closed for once, watching his chest rise and fall. On one of those days, he had spoken slowly about the future. He had said that he knew my mother would remarry at some point and that there was nothing wrong with that. He had said that he hoped I would be kind to whoever came into her life, but he had also said that the house was meant for me and that he had arranged it so that nobody could push me out or take it away while I was still alive. I had nodded back then, but the words had floated past me because I was too focused on the machines beside him. After the funeral, things had blurred into meetings and signatures. My mother had cried often. She had said she could not deal with the banks, the lawyer, the bills. She had pushed stacks of papers toward me and asked me to sign them so she could handle things more easily. At first, I almost did, but each time, Mr. Harris insisted on talking directly to me. He would explain slowly what each document meant, and he sometimes told my mother that certain forms did not need my signature at all. He was a calm man with a dry voice. He had already been old by my standards back then, with gray hair and a face lined from years of reading small print. He had looked me in the eyes and reminded me that rushed signatures were dangerous. Over time, the storm quieted. My mother's grief shifted into something else. She started worrying about money and image. She began to compare herself with other women in the neighborhood. She said some of them had husbands who took them on trips or bought them new cars. She said my father had never liked showing off, and the phrase always sounded like a complaint, not a memory. When she met Peter, she started dressing differently. She laughed more loudly at parties. Peter was polite at first. He made a show of saying that he respected my father's memory and that he was not trying to replace him. He moved into the house like it was a temporary stop. He would mention dream plans about a bigger place someday, near a golf course or the beach. In practice, though, he enjoyed the comfort that already existed. He liked the fact that there was no mortgage because my father had paid it off. He liked that the neighborhood was quiet and safe, and that my salary helped with bills my mother did not like to think about. He would hand my mother a small sum for groceries and then let my income cover the rest. Bella moved in a few years after that. She had lived with her own mother in another city before, but her mother wanted to downsize, so Bella came to us. That was how my mother described it. It sounded like a business decision more than a family choice. Bella came with boxes of clothes, ring lights, and a long list of expectations. She was 16 then, full of that hungry kind of energy that made everything feel urgent. She complained that her room was too small, that the bathroom was not bright enough for her makeup, that the house was old. My mother bent herself in small ways to meet those complaints. Suddenly, the old guest room became Bella's room. The garage, where my father had kept his tools, turned into a storage area for props and costumes. At first, I tried to be easygoing. I gave up my parking spot so Bella could have it, and I parked on the street. I bought new chairs when she did a video and scraped the old ones with high heels. If something of mine broke under her feet, my mother would say that teenagers were just careless and that I should not blame Bella. It was always simpler to keep going than to fight each small thing. Meanwhile, my job became the one place where I felt solid. I work as a developer in a mid-sized tech company. The office is open plan and full of bright lights and fake plants. There, people ask my opinion. There, people actually listen. When a project is difficult, they give it to me, not because they want to dump work on me, but because they trust me to handle it. It is not glamorous, but it is clear. One afternoon, a few days after I opened the metal box, I sat at my desk in the office and tried to focus on code. The screen blurred. In my mind, I kept seeing my mother's face as she told me to leave if I cared so much about my things. I kept hearing Bella's joke about turning my room into her closet. My coworker, Jake, rolled his chair over to my desk and asked if I was okay. Jake is the kind of person people notice, tall, relaxed, always with some joke ready, but he is also the one who stays late with me when a deadline is close. We have spent years sitting side by side in meeting rooms while managers praised our work. I told him I was fine at first, but he did not buy it. He asked again, more quietly, if something was wrong at home. I ended up telling him the story in pieces, how my mother and Bella wanted my room and my car, how they treated the house like it was theirs. I tried to keep my tone light, like it was just a weird situation. Jake stared at me for a second and then asked if the house was really in my name. I said that it was, as far as I knew. I said that my father had told me that before he died. I mentioned the metal box, the letter, the documents I had seen. I told him my mother said the house was hers in spirit and that I was being selfish. He shook his head and said that this made no sense. He told me that if the house was legally mine, then I had more power than I thought. He said my mother and Bella were acting like I was a guest on their couch when it was the other way around. Then he asked me a simple question that made everything inside me pause. He asked if I had ever actually read the full documents or talked to the lawyer my father trusted. I realized that I had not. Not really. I had seen bits and pieces during the chaos after my father's death, but I had never sat down and gone through everything in a calm moment. I had never taken the time to understand what rights I actually had. I had just assumed that going along with my mother's wishes was the safest path. After work, Jake and I went to a small coffee shop near the office. It was quiet there, with low music in the background and the smell of roasted beans. We sat at a corner table. He pulled out his phone and started talking about tenants' rights and property law in a general way. He said he was not a lawyer, but he knew enough to see that something was off. He asked if I had any contact details for the lawyer my father used. I said that I might. I knew there had been a business card somewhere, years ago. I remembered my father keeping it in his wallet and on the fridge. I also knew that I had done a backup of my contacts when I changed phones a long time ago. I took out my phone and opened the contacts list. I scrolled slowly, more from habit than hope. The names blurred together at first. Old classmates, coworkers, distant relatives. My thumb kept moving. I was about to give up and tell Jake that I would look for a paper card at home. Then my thumb stopped on a name that made my chest tighten again. It was a name I had not thought about in a long time, but seeing it written out made everything my father had said feel very real again. The contact line read, Harris, Dad's lawyer. I stared at the name on my phone for a long moment. Jake asked quietly if that was the lawyer my father had trusted. I told him it was, as far as I remembered. I said that this was the man who had explained papers to me back when everything was a blur. Jake leaned back in his chair and told me that this was my next step. He said that I should call the lawyer, ask for a simple explanation of what the will and the trust actually said. He reminded me that I was not doing anything wrong by asking questions. I could feel the weight of the metal box in my mind while he spoke, like it was sitting on the table between us instead of back in my room. On the train ride home, I kept opening and closing my contacts list, looking at the name. My thumb hovered over the call button more than once. Each time, I felt this strange mix of guilt and relief. A part of me still believed that asking for help was a kind of betrayal, like I was going behind my mother's back. Another part of me remembered my father telling me that written promises meant nothing if you never read them. I did not call that night. Instead, I went home, went straight to my room, and opened the metal box again. I spread the papers on my bed. I tried to make sense of them. There were phrases I did not fully understand, but I could see that some sections were clearly about me, and some were clearly about my mother. I saw words about ownership, rights of use, and conditions. It felt like reading a map in a language I half knew. Over the next few days, the house felt tenser. Bella shot more videos around the living room, using my things as props. My mother kept dropping small comments about how some changes would be happening soon, how the house would be used in a better way. Peter made jokes about how I would thank them later for pushing me to grow up. One evening, my mother announced that we would be having a small family dinner. She said that some relatives were coming over and that it would be nice if I showed my support for Bella. I knew that this did not usually end well for me, but I agreed. I still believed at that moment that being present was expected of me. The dining table was set up with the good plates and a tablecloth my mother only used when she wanted to impress people. My aunt on my mother's side came, along with one of my cousins and his wife. They all kissed my mother's cheek and told her the house looked lovely. None of them knew yet that half the furniture they praised had been bought with my salary or left by my father. At first, the conversation was light. People asked Bella about her studies and her followers. She talked about brands and engagement as if these were the only real measures of value. Peter bragged about some deal at work. My mother asked my cousin about his kids and told him he should bring them over more often now that the house was becoming more modern. I kept my head down and answered questions about work when they came. People always seemed surprised that I was good at what I did. They said I did not look like a tech person, whatever that meant. I had grown used to that kind of comment. Halfway through the meal, my mother stood up and cleared her throat in that way she did when she wanted attention. She said that she and Peter had been thinking a lot about the future of the family. She said that the house was an important asset that had to be managed wisely. Then she looked straight at me. She said that they had drafted a simple document to help put things in order. She used those exact words, simple and put things in order. She walked over to the sideboard and picked up a neat stack of printed pages. When she placed them in front of me, the whole table turned to look. She explained to everyone that the document was just a formality to reflect how things really were. She said that since she was the one who built a life in this house, and since Peter helped her now, it made sense for the house to be in their names. She said that my name could stay on everything as a beneficiary after they both passed, but that during their lifetime, it was only fair for them to be in charge. As she spoke, Bella smiled down at her plate like she already knew she had won. My cousin glanced at me with a confused expression. My mother told the table that once the house was in her and Peter's names, they could make better use of it, including giving Bella the space she deserved. She said this was about fairness and responsibility. I looked at the first page. My name was there, along with my mother's and Peter's. There were words like transfer and title change. It was not a small form. It was a legal document that would move the house out of my control and into theirs. My throat went dry. My mother told everyone that she was sure I would sign. She said that she had raised me to be generous and that I understood family came first. She laughed lightly and said that paperwork was just a boring detail, something for me to handle since I was the organized one. People around the table chuckled, not understanding what was really happening. I put the papers down and said that I would not sign that night. I did not raise my voice. I simply said that I would not sign something I did not understand. I said that the house had been left to me by my father and that I needed to speak to his lawyer before I agreed to any change. The mood shifted fast. My mother's smile froze. She told everyone that she could not believe I was making this difficult in front of family. She said that she was hurt, that she had trusted me to do the right thing. Bella muttered something under her breath about me being selfish. Peter said that he was disappointed and that a grown man should not cling to a technicality. I repeated that I was not signing anything that night. My voice shook, but the words stayed steady. I said that I had a right to understand the consequences. My cousin tried to lighten the mood, but my mother cut him off. She told me that if I wanted to act like an outsider, maybe I should think about where I planned to live in the future. After dinner, when the relatives left, my mother followed me to the hallway. She told me that if I refused to sign, I should not expect to stay in the house forever. She said that she would not let me hold her life hostage because of paperwork. Bella stood behind her, leaning on the doorframe, and said that if I moved out, it would be easier for everyone. I walked out to the driveway to get some air. The evening was cool. The lights from the living room spilled onto the front steps. Behind me, the front door opened again, and Bella's voice called out. She told me that I was being dramatic over a house and that once the transfer was done, I could still visit like a normal son. She said that at least then she would finally get the big room and the car without all this tension. Peter appeared next, standing on the porch. He said that this was my chance to show I was an adult. He told me that staying in my childhood home at my age was not healthy, and that maybe they were doing me a favor by pushing me out of my comfort zone. He added that the house was my mother's in spirit, and that I should respect that. Their words did something to me. It was like a lens snapping into focus. I realized that they had already decided the house was theirs, and I was just an obstacle in their path. They spoke as if I was camping in their guest room, when in reality they were the ones living in a place my father had left to me. I did not argue with them. I just said that I had heard what they wanted. I said that I would not sign anything until I knew exactly what the original document said. Then I walked past them and got into my car. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. Instead of driving around aimlessly, I went to see my Aunt Miriam, my father's older sister. She lived in a small house across town, a place that always smelled like tea and old fabric. I had not visited her in a while because things at my own house always seemed to demand my attention. She opened the door and looked surprised to see me, but she let me in right away. We sat at her kitchen table. I told her what was happening at home, how my mother and Peter wanted me to sign papers, how Bella expected my room and my car. I told her about the metal box and the letter from my father. Aunt Miriam listened without interrupting. Her face grew more and more serious. When I finished, she said that none of this shocked her. She said that my mother had always loved being the center of attention and that Peter enjoyed comfort without effort. She said that she had kept her distance because she did not want to fight with my mother, but she had always worried about me. She told me that she had been there when my father met with Mr. Harris to finalize the trust. She said that my father had made it very clear that the house would belong to me alone. According to her, the trust gave my mother the right to live there only as long as she did not try to push me out or pressure me to give up my rights. She called it a respect condition. She also said that my father had been very careful. He had wanted to protect my mother from hardship, but he had also wanted to protect me from being treated like a guest in my own home. Aunt Miriam said that if my mother was now threatening to throw me out or trying to force me to sign over the title, she might already be breaking the rules of the trust. Hearing that made my heart thump in my chest. It was one thing to feel unfairly treated. It was another thing to hear that there were clear conditions being ignored. Aunt Miriam went to a drawer and pulled out a worn business card. She placed it on the table. It was the same name I had seen on my phone, Mr. Harris, with the firm's address and number. She told me that my father had given her the card as a backup in case I ever needed support and felt too guilty to ask directly. She said that this was the time to use it. She added that I was not dishonoring my mother by protecting myself. I was honoring my father's careful planning. I drove home later that night with the card in my pocket and the contact open on my phone. The house was dark when I parked outside. I sat in the car with the engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal. Through the front window I could see the faint glow of a screen, probably Bella, scrolling in her room. My hand shook only once when I unlocked my phone. I opened the contacts list, tapped on Harris, Dad's lawyer, and pressed the call button. When a calm male voice answered and said his name, I swallowed and told him who I was. Then I told him that we needed to talk about the house. Mr. Harris asked if I could come to his office the next day. His voice was the same as I remembered from years ago, dry, calm, and patient. He did not sound surprised. That bothered me and comforted me at the same time. The next morning, I told my mother that I had an early meeting at work and left the house in a shirt and pants that looked a little more formal than usual. She barely glanced up from her phone. Bella was at the kitchen table filming a short clip with a mug of coffee that she did not drink. Peter was in the living room, half watching the news. Mr. Harris's office was in an older building downtown. The hallway smelled like paper and cleaning products. The sign on the door still had his name on it, with the same firm logo I remembered from my childhood. I knocked and stepped inside. His assistant led me to a small meeting room. A few minutes later, Mr. Harris came in carrying a folder. He looked older, with more gray hair and more lines around his eyes, but his posture was the same. He shook my hand and said it had been a long time. I sat down across from him and tried not to feel like a nervous teenager. He asked me to tell him, in my own words, what was happening at home. So I did. I told him about my mother pushing me to sign simple forms, about Bella expecting my room and my car, about Peter talking about the house as if it were theirs. I told him about the dinner, the transfer papers, the threats about me not being welcome if I did not sign. While I spoke, he took notes in tight, neat handwriting. He did not interrupt much. He only asked small questions. When did that happen? Who was present? What exact words were used? When I finished, he sat back and studied me for a moment. Then he opened the folder he had brought. He told me that inside were copies of my father's will and the living trust. He said he would explain them in simple terms. He went through them point by point, not reading every line out loud, but summarizing. He said that the house was, in full, my property. My mother did not own it. She had what he called a right to live there as long as certain conditions were met. One of those conditions was that she could not try to remove me from the house or force me to give up my ownership while she was still living there. Another was that she could not use threats or pressure about the house to control me. He also explained that there were rules about how my late father's assets could be used. My income was separate from that. Anything I bought with my own money was mine. He said that if my mother and Peter were using my inheritance or salary in ways that left me with nothing, that could be a problem too. He made it clear that nothing in the trust allowed my mother to demand the house be put in her and Peter's names. He said that if I had signed the transfer document she gave me, I would have been giving away rights my father had worked very hard to protect. He looked at me in a direct, quiet way when he said that. I felt a cold, slow anger rise in my chest. Not the wild kind, but something very controlled. I asked what I could do now. He said there were options. One was to do nothing and hope my mother stopped pushing. He looked at me, and we both understood that this was unlikely. Another was to enforce the conditions in the trust. That would mean making it clear, in writing, that my mother's recent actions were not acceptable and that she had to stop if she wanted to keep living in the house. He explained that if she continued to threaten me or try to force me to sign things, the trust allowed him, as executor, to take steps. Those steps could include ending her right to live there. He said this slowly, like he knew how heavy it sounded. I sat there in silence for a while. Part of me felt sick that it might come to that. Another part of me remembered my mother telling me that if I cared so much about my belongings, I could take them and leave. I remembered her telling relatives that the house was hers in spirit and that I was being selfish. I told Mr. Harris that I did not want revenge. I just wanted to live without being threatened in my own home. I said I wanted to understand what was mine and what I could do to protect it. He nodded and said that was exactly what the trust was designed for. He suggested some steps. First, I should separate my finances completely. Any joint arrangements that gave my mother access to my accounts should be closed. Second, I should gather proof of what had been said and done recently. Texts, messages, anything that showed the pressure and threats. Third, I should think about whether I actually wanted to stay in the house at all, or if I wanted to move out, and let the legal process speak for itself. He told me that he could prepare formal notices to my mother, explaining the situation in clear terms. He said that these notices would tell her what lines she had crossed and what could happen if she continued. He did not show me the drafts yet. He said that part would come later if I chose to go forward. When I left his office, my head felt strangely light. The sky outside was still gray, but I noticed the way the wind moved through the trees on the street. For the first time in years, I had a clear picture of where I stood. I was not a guest. I was not a child hiding in a corner. I was the owner of the house where 3 other people happened to be living. The next stop was the bank. I went to a branch I had not visited for a long time, one near the office. A staff member led me to a small meeting room with glass walls. I explained that I wanted to review all accounts connected to my name. I told her I needed printed statements for the last few years. She asked some questions, typed on her keyboard, and then frowned slightly. She pointed out that some automatic transfers had been set up after my father's death, moving small amounts into an account in my mother's name every month. I recognized them. Those had been part of his plan to support her. That was fine. But she also showed me other transactions I had not paid much attention to before, payments for things Bella wanted that had been drawn from accounts my mother technically controlled with my name attached. The staff member asked if I wanted to keep those arrangements. I said I did not. I asked her to separate my income completely, close the shared card, and move my main savings into an account only I could access. She checked my ID and started the process. While she worked, I stared at the pattern of the carpet and tried not to think about how many years I had let other people reach into my finances without question. By the time I left the bank, I had a folder full of printed statements and confirmation forms. The papers were heavier than they looked. I put them in my backpack and felt the strap bite into my shoulder in a satisfying way. It felt like carrying a small shield. From there, I went to a self-storage facility on the edge of town. It was a big, ugly building with rows of metal doors and a fluorescent-lit office. The clerk behind the counter explained the different sizes of units. I picked one that was not huge, but big enough for boxes of books, tools, some furniture pieces, and electronics. He handed me a contract to sign. I read it slowly this time. Then I signed and took the key and the code for the gate. When I stepped into the cold, echoing hallway of units, I felt like I had stepped into a blank page. It was just empty space, but it was mine. On the way home, I stopped at a hardware and office supply store. I walked through the aisles with a simple list in my head. I bought strong cardboard boxes, packing tape, and a marker. I picked up labels and a portable lockbox. I also bought a small fireproof safe. As I put each item in the cart, it felt less like shopping and more like gathering tools. At the checkout, the cashier made a small joke about moving day. I smiled politely and said I was just organizing. That was true, in a way. For the next few days, I worked a double life. By day, I went to the office and did my job as usual. I fixed bugs, joined meetings, and answered emails. Coworkers asked about my weekend plans. I gave vague answers. By night, I sorted my life into piles. In my room, I made 3 sections on the floor. One pile was for things that clearly belonged to me and were mentioned in bank statements or receipts. My computer, my monitors, the console, the couch, my father's tools, the books he left specifically in my name. Another pile was for shared items that my mother might want to keep, things I did not care about. The third pile was trash and donations. I took photos of everything I moved. I labeled boxes carefully: books, computer gear, tools, documents. I slid my father's papers and the bank statements into the new safe and locked it. Then I put the safe into one of the boxes labeled Documents and Trust. Whenever the house was empty, when my mother and Peter were at work and Bella was out filming, I loaded a few boxes into my car and drove them to the storage unit. The first time I rolled up the metal door and stacked my boxes inside, the echo of cardboard against concrete felt like a small promise. I was not running away. I was preparing. At home, my mother noticed small changes. She asked where certain things had gone. I told her that I was organizing my room and putting some items into storage while I thought about what to do. She did not question it too much. In her mind, I think, she still believed that everything would end with me signing her papers. Bella made comments when she saw empty spaces. She joked that I was finally making room for her stuff. She told her friends in front of me that soon she would have the biggest room in the house and that it was about time. She called me a hoarder more than once. I did not argue. I just kept packing. Mr. Harris and I stayed in touch. We spoke on the phone several times. I told him about the bank, the storage, the dinner. He told me that he was documenting everything, just in case. He mentioned that he had pulled the original trust file and reviewed my father's instructions again. His voice never rose. He never sounded excited. That calm tone did more to steady me than any speech could have. One evening, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone at my desk. The house was quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I opened my laptop and gathered the digital pieces. I downloaded statements from my email, saved screenshots of text messages where my mother threatened to kick me out, saved messages where Bella called my room hers already, and talked about taking over once I left. I organized all of it into folders: bank, trust, messages, photos. I backed everything up to an external drive and to a cloud account only I controlled. Then I opened a blank document and started to type out a timeline. I wrote down dates, events, who said what. It looked clinical on the screen, but I knew each line captured a moment when something had crossed a line. When I finished, I clicked on the print icon. I selected the folders I wanted hard copies of, the timeline, key emails, and a few screenshots. I heard the printer in the corner wake up, the small whir of plastic and gears. Then, in the silence of the night, page after page began to slide out onto the tray, one on top of another. The printer kept working long after I stopped watching it. I sat back and stared at the ceiling while the pages slid out, one after another. Each sheet was just ink and paper, but together they felt like something solid for the first time. My side of the story, in words and numbers that could not be brushed away with a sigh or a joke. The next time I met Mr. Harris, he asked me to bring everything I had gathered. I arrived at his office with my backpack full, the zipper straining a little. We sat in the same small meeting room as before. I emptied the backpack onto the table, printed statements, the timeline, copies of messages, photos of the house and the items I had moved. He went through them slowly. He read the messages where my mother told me that if I did not sign, I should start packing. He studied the screenshots where Bella talked about taking over my room and my things once I was gone. He checked the bank statements and receipts and matched them against the photos. Every now and then he nodded, but he did not say much until he reached the end. Then he told me that I had been thorough. He said that it was clear there was a pattern: pressure, threats, attempts to make me feel like a guest in my own house. He said that my father had expected something like this might happen, which was why the trust had been set up the way it was. There was no joy in his voice when he said this, just a tired kind of certainty. He told me that we were at a point where I needed to decide what I wanted. He reminded me that doing nothing was still an option, but it would mean accepting that my mother and the others would keep pushing, and probably harder now that they sensed resistance. Then he described another path, in careful, general terms. He said that the trust allowed certain actions if my mother broke the conditions attached to her right to live in the house. He said those actions would have consequences, serious ones. He mentioned that he could send formal communications, that things could be filed in ways that made the terms impossible to ignore. He did not hand me the letters or show me the exact wording. He simply said that if we took that route, we had to follow it through to the end. I sat there for a long time before answering. I thought about my father writing those clauses, imagining future arguments. I thought about my mother telling relatives that the house was hers in spirit. I thought about Bella laughing in my face and calling me a dragon guarding junk. I told Mr. Harris that I was done living like a guest. I said that I wanted the trust to do what it was meant to do. I said that I did not want shouting matches. I did not want drama. I just wanted clear lines. He nodded and told me that then we would handle it properly. The next days blurred into a series of quiet tasks. Mr. Harris called me to say there were some documents I needed to sign, somewhere neutral. He suggested a place near the courthouse where we could also have signatures witnessed if needed. We met in a lobby with marble floors and buzzing fluorescent lights. A clerk in a neutral-colored suit checked our IDs and watched as we signed several sets of papers on a long counter. I did not ask for every phrase to be explained. I trusted that these were the steps we had discussed. Instructions tied to the trust, notices prepared in advance, things that would take effect under certain conditions. Mr. Harris pointed out where I needed to sign and initial. Each pen stroke felt like a small cut through something soft and tangled, clearing it. When we were done, the clerk stamped and filed what needed to be filed. Mr. Harris put the rest into his briefcase. He told me that from a legal point of view, everything was ready. He said that the only thing left was to choose how and when my family would learn the reality of the situation. At the same time, my life was shifting in another way. I had decided I did not want to stay in the house, even if the trust allowed me to. The place held my father's memory, but the daily tension had twisted that memory into something bitter. I wanted walls that did not listen to every argument, a kitchen where every object did not carry a story about who bought it. I found a small apartment about 20 minutes away from the house and closer to my office. It was on the third floor of an old building with thin walls and no elevator. The living room was barely bigger than my current bedroom. The kitchen was narrow and plain. When I first stepped inside, the air smelled like dust and paint instead of history. The landlord talked about rent and deposit. I listened, signed, and shook his hand. It was simple. No one guilted me or called me selfish. It felt almost strange how straightforward it was. Over the next week, I stepped up the pace of my packing. I booked a moving company for a specific day, carefully chosen. My mother and Peter had planned a weekend trip with Bella, some kind of retreat that they said would be good content for her channels. My mother told me their plans in a light tone, as if she was doing me a favor by leaving me alone with my thoughts. She repeated that she expected an answer about the transfer when they came back. She said she wanted to start the new chapter as soon as possible. Bella added that she hoped I would stop dragging things out and just act like a grown-up. Peter made a casual remark about how peaceful the house would be once everything settled. I told them that they would have their answer when they returned. That was the only clear thing I said. My mother took it as a sign that I had given in. I saw the relief in her eyes. Bella looked pleased, like someone who had finally worn down a stubborn opponent. None of them asked what I meant exactly. They heard what they wanted to hear. The morning they left, the house was noisy with suitcases and last-minute instructions. My mother reminded me to water some plants. Bella told me not to touch anything in her room. Peter joked that I should not throw any wild parties. They all left in a rush of perfume and car doors, and then the house was silent. An hour later, the moving trucks arrived. I guided the movers through the rooms with a printed list in my hand. I pointed out exactly what was going: the couch I had bought, the TV, my desk, the old armchair my father had left to me, the bookshelf, my boxes. I left anything that clearly belonged to my mother or Peter or Bella. I did not touch their clothes, their decorative items, their dishes. The movers did not ask questions. They wrapped furniture in blankets, carried boxes down the stairs, and loaded everything with practiced movements. I checked each item off my list. When one of them accidentally picked up a lamp my mother had bought, I told him to put it back. I wanted no arguments later about what was taken. We drove to the storage unit first. I watched as my belongings disappeared into the space I had rented, forming neat rows along the walls. Then we went to the new apartment. The movers carried my couch into the small living room, set up my desk near the window, and placed my boxes where I asked. The space filled up quickly, but it felt right. No one else's taste was in the walls. By late afternoon, my life was split between two locations: the essentials in the apartment, the rest in storage. The family house I knew looked very different now. Only their things remained. Before it got dark, I drove back to the house one more time, alone. I walked through each room slowly. In the living room, the marks where the couch and bookshelf had stood were visible on the carpet. The TV stand was gone. The corner where my father's armchair had been was empty. In my old bedroom, the shelves were bare. Only the outline of where my bed had been was left on the floor. The walls felt closer somehow. I opened the wardrobe and saw nothing but hangers. The metal box was gone too, locked in the safe in my new place. The room looked like a stage after the actors had left. Mr. Harris arrived shortly after. He stepped into the living room carrying his briefcase. He looked around without surprise. He told me that everything was in place on his end. He said that the necessary notices were ready to be presented, that the timing was good. He did not sound excited. He sounded prepared. We talked quietly for a few minutes. He asked if I was certain I wanted to follow through. I told him that I was. I said that my mother had told me to leave if I cared about my belongings so much. I said that I had done exactly that, but I had done it under the rules my father had written. He nodded and told me that then all that remained was to wait for them to come home. He said he would be the one to explain everything. He wanted me there if I could handle it, but he also said he understood if I preferred to stay outside. I walked to the front door and looked out at the street. The sky was starting to darken. Somewhere out there, my mother, Peter, and Bella were driving back, excited for their new chapter. I took the house key from my pocket and turned it in my fingers once, feeling the familiar pattern of the metal. Then I walked back into the quiet, almost empty living room, where the only thing that looked truly solid was Mr. Harris's dark suit and the closed briefcase resting on the low table between us. I heard their car before I saw it. The low rumble rolled up the street and stopped outside the house. Through the front window I saw headlights wash over the driveway, then go dark. Car doors opened and shut, loud in the evening quiet. My mother's voice came first, high and cheerful, talking about how good it felt to be home. Bella laughed about some video she wanted to film in my new room. Peter said something about needing a real drink. They did not sound worried. They sounded like people returning to a place they believed was fully theirs. The front door opened. They stepped into the hallway with their bags and suitcases, still talking. Then they stopped. Without my couch and bookshelf, the hallway looked bigger. The hooks where my coats had hung were empty. The small bench I had bought for shoes was gone. There was a faint outline on the wall where one of my framed photos had been. My mother blinked and asked what had happened to the furniture. Her voice rose on the last word. Bella came in behind her and looked around, her phone already in her hand. Peter stood in the doorway, frowning. I was in the living room with Mr. Harris. We did not move. The room, stripped of most of my things, looked strange. The TV was gone. The couch was gone. The old armchair was gone. Only a few chairs my mother had collected remained, pushed against the wall like nervous guests. My mother rushed in and then froze again when she saw us. Her eyes went from my face to Mr. Harris's suit to the briefcase on the low table. Her mouth opened and closed once. She demanded to know where everything was. She asked if there had been a robbery. She asked how I could just sit there. She did not wait for answers. She just poured questions into the air. Mr. Harris stood up slowly. He buttoned his jacket and introduced himself with his full name. He reminded her that he had handled my father's will and the living trust. Peter recognized the name first. His face shifted. Bella kept filming, at least at the start. My mother said she did not understand why he was here. She said this was her home. Her voice shook on the word her. Mr. Harris opened his briefcase and took out a neat stack of documents. He laid them on the table and spoke in the same calm, dry tone I remembered. He said that the house's legal owner was me. He placed the title on top of the stack where my name was printed, clear and unmoving. He said that my mother had a conditional right to live here under specific rules agreed to by my father in the trust. He went on. He said those conditions included not attempting to force me to sign over the house, not threatening to throw me out, and not treating my ownership as something temporary or meaningless. He read lines from the trust in simple words. He mentioned the conversations, the messages, the simple documents she had tried to make me sign. My mother tried to cut him off, but he kept going. He explained that her recent actions, pressuring me in front of relatives, talking about my room and belongings as already promised to Bella, telling me to leave if I would not sign, were not minor disagreements. They were violations of the very conditions that allowed her to live here. At some point, Bella lowered her phone. The recording light went dark. Peter stepped closer to the table and scanned the papers, his lips moving as he read my name over and over in the owner line. My mother said it was a misunderstanding. She said families argued all the time. She said she never meant any of it as a threat. Her voice had lost its edge. It sounded smaller. Mr. Harris did not argue with her. He just pointed to dates, to phrases she had used, to the pattern. He said that, as the executor, he had a responsibility. He had already filed certain notices based on my decision to enforce the trust. He told her very clearly that her right to live here had been revoked. They would have a set period to vacate. If they did not, further action would follow. She looked at me then, really looked at me. There was anger in her eyes, but also something like shock that I existed in this way, as more than just a background figure. She asked how I could do this to her. She asked if I understood she had nowhere else to go. She said my father would be ashamed. I answered her calmly. I said that my father had written all of this to protect me from exactly this situation. I said I had not taken anything that was not mine. I said she had told me that if I cared so much about my belongings, I should leave. So I had left, and I had taken only what was mine, under the rules my father set. Bella whispered that this was insane, that I was ruining everything over paper. Peter asked if there was some way to fix it if I signed now. Mr. Harris answered that the documents had already been executed and filed. The structure my father built had woken up. It was not something that could be undone by a sudden change of heart. Silence settled over the room. It was thick, but it did not crush me. My mother sank into one of her own flimsy chairs, staring at the empty spaces where my things had been. Bella stood in the middle of the room, turning in a slow circle, as if the walls themselves had shifted. Peter kept reading the same page without really seeing it. I reached into my pocket and took out the house key. It felt different in my hand now, lighter somehow. I stepped closer to the table where Mr. Harris's briefcase waited, still open. I placed the key next to the stack of documents. Mr. Harris nodded once and covered it with his hand. I looked at my mother, at Peter, at Bella. None of them spoke. Then I turned, walked out of the almost empty living room, and stepped through the front door. The air outside was cool. Behind me, the house stayed quiet, with my family sitting in the shell they had tried to claim, and the man in the suit holding the key